Back again, and this is a first, Rob. We've got two guests for the exact same launch, but CodeGuru, like we said before, there's a lot of different bits and pieces to it. So again, here talking to us about the second part, CodeGuru Reviewer, is Nikunj Vaidya, Senior Solutions Architect here at AWS. Nikunj, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Nick and Rob, for having me.
Yeah, welcome. It's really interesting. This is, like Nick said, this is the first time we've kind of taken two different demos on the same product, but I think that it warrants it because we really have two very distinct features here. So can you give us an overview of what we're going to be talking about?
Yeah, so basically, I think we want to actually, I want to give you a quick overview of what CodeGuru Reviewer does. But before that, let me quickly just address what is the exact problem that CodeGuru addresses. Right? So in a nutshell, if you think of it as CodeGuru helps to automate and harden the code reviews and catches those difficult to find defects at a very early stage of the development. So what do we mean by those difficult to find defects, right? These are the defects which are in the categories of like the race condition, the data corruption, the resource leaks, the sensitive information leak. These are the issues. Not only are they difficult to identify, but even once you identify, to really root cause the issue and to really build a fix in a very limited amount of time when the issue is happening on the production network, it makes it a little bit more challenging. So these are the issues which CodeGuru helps to discover at an early stage of development. Now, if you compare it with the traditional code review systems that we have as of today, right? So first, it's very challenging and time-consuming for even most of the most experienced code reviewers, right? The SMEs who get involved in code review also, to identify the problematic code and also to ensure that no problematic code is left behind before the application is shipped to the customers. It's very difficult for an SME, not only from technical point of view, they are very technically competent, but just considering the fact that the human is involved in there are a lot of variables that the person has to balance with. Secondly, these issues, if they are not caught at an early stage, they can easily slip through the existing review mechanisms. And these review mechanisms, which are existing ones, are you can think of it as like the unit test or the manual code reviews that happen. This can potentially delay the code approval also, and kind of pretty much takes away the valuable time from the SME who are engaged into doing some high value tasks in doing the code reviews for every commits that are coming in, right? And as you can imagine, in a release process, as the release, we come near to the timeline or the deadline of the release, the rate of the commits keeps increasing. And that pretty much pulls in the SMEs, and they are kind of pretty much engaged doing the code reviews at a high rate, whereas their value addition could be at building out futuristic technology or the value addition that we are doing for them, for the company. So in a way, what happens is the other aspect of it, right, is most of the human code reviews are focused on the business logic, very less on the functional correctness. And this is where CodeGuru complements the human code reviews and offloads those human code reviews from, let them focus on the business logic. And the functional correctness checking is carried out by CodeGuru by not only checking it out, but also providing the actionable recommendations to really address and fix those lines of code which are at risk.
Yeah,
so it's a kind of just a very short overview that I wanted to kind of give you.
Yeah, and I want to sort of, reiterate one of the points that you made, which is that the emphasis of existing code reviews, while in an ideal world would be to make sure our code is optimal in every way, it largely becomes focused on, is our code doing what we want it to do? And then not necessarily an afterthought, but all on the while we'll be trying to assess, like, is it doing it in a performant fashion? But oftentimes that's limited, even for very experienced engineers, to be able to assess the true effectiveness of the code to accomplish that. And Rob joked before, we're not compilers. That's not the best use of our own brains and our own abilities. So to my understanding here, CodeGuru Reviewer is a sect or a set of features within CodeGuru that enable us and customers and developers to be able to actually have that automated introspection of code for its functional or operational effectiveness. Is that correct?
Exactly. So if you think of it as just from the developer workflow perspective, when the developer has built this code and pushes the code onto the code repository, that is the time when the developer would generate a pull request
Mm-hmm.
and kind of initiate the code review process. When we configure CodeGuru is just listening to those pull request notifications. So as soon as a particular repo is associated and you generate a pull request notification, the notification goes to the CodeGuru reviewer. This is the time when either the human get involved in doing the review for the business logic, and the CodeGuru reviewer focuses on the functional correctness of it.
Now, Nikunj, I don't know if we have a bit of a chicken and an egg problem here, right? Because if we say that engineers are limited in what they can accomplish in code reviews, we've heard that CodeGuru is powered by machine learning, and for folks that have been around the block of machine learning, they know that there's a training phase that's often involved, right? So if CodeGuru Reviewer is going to be able to surface these inefficiencies in our code, what has that been trained on, right? We clearly need a training set there.
Absolutely. That's a very good point. In fact, CodeGuru is actually powered by the machine learning models that are trained with millions of code reviews that have been conducted within internal to Amazon, as well as on the open source projects. So you can think of it as like the decades of learning experience and decades of knowledge and expertise that we have within the Amazon is kind of poured into these machine learning models and now are kind of made available to all of our customers to be leveraged.
Awesome. So yeah, just essentially, not just automating code reviews in a way that are quicker with the same level of quality that can already exist, but just to a extent of experience and a breadth of experience with millions of code reviews of data that any one individual engineer may never be able to amass in sort of their lifetime.
Exactly. And that's where I think that's the beauty of automation that comes into picture. And in fact, not only from the aspect of the number of the amount of learning that has happened, but think of it as various different segments of expertise that you need to do a code review. There are a lot of different functional expertise that you need, and you would need potentially, in realistic case, multiple SMEs kind of function looking at the code and reviewing the code. What CodeGuru offers is, and I will share my screen at some point of time to show you the various different categories of issues that CodeGuru focuses on and helps you to uncover it at an early stage of a development cycle.
Yeah, and that's actually a really good point. Like you said, there's different levels of expertise to understand the different downstream impacts of code. And I think there's no better testament to this than the demo we just saw with Daniela, right? Profiling your application as it's actually running in either your test or your integration environment is another step downstream from actually authoring the code and merging those PRs into your code base. And so if you can catch that higher upstream, you don't even need to, or you're reducing the cost of catching that bug down the line. And this has been a recurring theme we've found here. The earlier you catch a bug, not just in its existence in your live application or your live environment, but in the development process, sort of wholesale, you are saving yourself dollars, cents, and developer cycles.
Absolutely. I think the ROI is very high, considering the fact that you would have already a profiler which is doing the runtime execution performance evaluation, and you have a CodeGuru Reviewer which is doing static code analysis. You would have a kind of a feedback loop also between these two different functionalities, right? There are recommendations that could be recommended by the profiler, and you would go through the same cycle of implementing that code and really running it and integrating the part of the code in your main base.
Based on your description so far, it sounds like the workflow is, I build a feature, I submit a pull request, and then CodeGuru is going to run automatically and start leaving comments and saying, hey, look, in this line in this file, there's this potential problem, right? What are the integrations? What kinds of repositories does this work with?
Oh yeah, that's a good question. So as of today, CodeGuru Reviewer is associated with supports the Bitbucket repositories. It supports the GitHub Enterprise-based repositories. You could say the public GitHub as well as the GitHub Enterprise. And GitHub Enterprise itself is also GitHub Enterprise Cloud and GitHub Enterprise Server, which are kind of self-hosted server. And of course, AWS code commit based code repositories too.
So I actually have a follow-up question to that, and it's one that I saw in chat as well, so I don't want to claim all the credit for this, but whenever we're as developers integrating another tool or a third-party API that requires access to something like my code base on GitHub, that can be a very scary proposition, right? We always want to make sure that we're only giving a tool the amount of privileges it needs. Principle of least permissions, we understand that for IAM. What sort of permissions does CodeGuru Reviewer need to actually perform this analysis on my code base?
No, in fact, actually, I think from the CodeGuru Reviewer perspective also, and I will show you in my demo also, that more from the perspective of when you, it is the time when you actually associate the CodeGuru Reviewer to the repository. During that period of time, you are authorizing the CodeGuru Reviewer to use and use the service of pull request modification. Now, once you do that, and the channel is established, and you are able to log in into using the credentials that you use in that repository itself. Once that channel is established, all the communications that happen are encrypted, and so pretty much all the code scanning that happens and the recommendations that are generated, that are all encrypted, and the security is in place. So from the and we will walk through those steps on how we associate that specific repository with either GitHub or with any other service provider.
Awesome. Yeah, no, understanding that there's that code is encrypted end to end as it goes to the actual reviewer service is really valuable. I guess to be a little more pointed, when we give another service or application permissions to interface with, let's say, our GitHub repo, there's nuance to the level of permissions that we can give it, right? Like, assuming you own it, you have root permissions, you can do everything, you're the owner of the bucket. For CodeGuru, I would assume it wouldn't need root access to your repository. It probably only needs certain permissions. Do you have examples of what those permissions are?
Absolutely. I think it is more of more in the lines of reading the repository. I think that is the main thing, that we want to read the repository. We want to list the repositories that we have, and once you associate it with that particular repository, you're able to read that code. Then pretty much whatever operations happen, they are outside the repository. So it's within the CodeGuru service itself. So that particular IAM role, which it will be using to access those repositories, will potentially be limited to reading the repository.
Awesome. Well, I know we'll get into a demo in just a little bit, but I guess you've sold me on the value of automated ML-powered code review. But when we're talking about the broader space of detecting bugs, I know we saw sort of the more active phase with Profiler before. How is Reviewer playing in sort of this broader ecosystem of bug detection tools?
Yeah, no. So I think from CodeGuru Reviewer perspective, what it focuses on, and that is, I think, the main key value that it brings is it focuses on difficult to find defects. Those are the ones which are found at an early stage. We are not talking about the syntax error checking or the style checking, right? Those are mostly covered at an early stage of development by the IDEs itself. The developer builds the code in the IDE, then pushes the code into the code repository. By the time potentially unit testing is also done, the code is functional. So we are looking for very difficult to find defects that are supposed to be caught at an early stage. So what Reviewer brings in is the value addition is basically those hard to find defects is very important. Apart from that, the Reviewer, what it does is it is backed up with machine learning models. So this machine learning models is the decades of experience that I mentioned about of analyzing and finding complex patterns of defects that can be caught and not only can be identified, but even the actionable recommendations will be provided. So once the actionable recommendations are provided, those actionable recommendations pretty much provide you a snippet of the code that you can use in your code to replace the identified lines of code that is at risk, right? And not only that, but it provides you a kind of a feedback loop between profiler and the reviewer too.
Yeah, I know Rob was joking before. He's holding out for the code writing as a service, but I guess we're just going one step closer to that with writing something and getting back what you should have written instead. Well, we'll see how far that gets, and I guess that begs the question: can we see that in action, Nikunj? Could we actually see what happens when I submit my garbage code and CodeGuru Reviewer rips it apart?
Absolutely. So let me quickly share my screen. Give me just 1 minute.
Yeah. While you're getting that set up, we've been having the stream cut out a little bit on LinkedIn Live, so some people may be just joining us right now. Again, we are live here with AWS What's Next, a live show where we cover the latest launches from Amazon Web Services. We try very hard to be able to get exciting demos on here from service team members. Nikunj here is showing us a little bit about CodeGuru Reviewer. Previously, we had a demo from Daniela on CodeGuru Profiler, and coming up after this demo, we will be having a demo from AWS App to Container, A2C, an application containerization automation tool in CLI. So we're looking forward to that. But again, get your questions in chat if you're just joining us now. Live show, we will be looking for it. But Nikunj, I'm done talking. Let's get back to the demo that you're going to show us for CodeGuru Reviewer.
Absolutely. Can you see my screen well?
Yep, you're coming through. Yeah, perfect.
Excellent. So I will just minimize the other screens. Perfect. So so basically what I want to do is I want to go to the service of Amazon CodeGuru. Let me move this guy on the right side. So I'm in this starter page of Amazon CodeGuru. And on the left-hand side, you can see there is a nice classification of reviewer and profiler. These are the two different functionalities. We will go onto the dashboard first and just see from the perspective of how the CodeGuru dashboard looks like. This is an aggregation of reviewer and profiler. So you can see the profiler recommendations that I would have gotten in the past, the reviewer recommendations that I have gotten until now, the lines of code metered. Now, this is also something which is this is counting the number of lines of code that it has reviewed. And this is the metered word would indicate that these are the lines which does not include the comments or just the one curly brace in a line or so. It's basically significant lines of code in a single line. So those are the lines of code that are counted and are maintained here. And these are the number of pull requests. So as I was mentioning, when you configure CodeGuru and associate it with a particular repository, during that period of time, it will basically subscribe to the pull request notifications. And these are the pull request notifications that it would potentially get. So this is the pull request, and we will go into the reviewer. Reviewer has two parts, two screens into this. One is associated repositories, and second is the code reviews. So code reviews is nothing but my code review history that has happened in the past, and associated repositories is the place where I can associate a particular repository. And this is pretty much coming on board, right? So it is as simple as you just click on associate repository. You have 4 different options. You can select AWS code commit, GitHub. GitHub itself is of the public GitHub or the GitHub Enterprise Cloud version. And it is as simple as when you connect to GitHub, you can just click on connect to GitHub. And once you connect to GitHub, you would be basically looking at all the repository listing in your GitHub account, right? So you could do that. However, let us say if I select AWS code commit and I look into my code repository location, this is the listing of repositories that are associated with my code commit. So so if I pick up one particular repository and I associate it, so this association will take potentially around, say, maybe around 20 to 30 seconds. And during this period of time, it is subscribing to the pull request notification of that particular repository. So it takes a little while, maybe around 20, 30 seconds. And once it is associated, you can start working on it. So here it is already associated. And as I showed you that you can associate with this. Now, For the demo, I will use this particular repo, which is basically the Java code, which we will analyze it. This is hosted on the GitHub account. The application is on the GitHub. And in this particular case, I have this code on my GitHub. So if I am a developer, I have been committing this code and pushing the code into the code repository. I will go into the pull request page, and this is the place where I want to initiate a pull request, initiate a code review. The first thing I will do is basically I will create a new pull request, and you can select from which branch to which branch you want to do the merging. So in this particular case, I'm selecting from feature 1 to master branch, and this is my code depths. Right? This is a particular piece of code which does the event. It's basically an event handler for tracking the shipments. So once I do that, I click create pull request, and once I click on create the pull request, me as a developer, I can just sit on the screen and wait for a little while until I get the recommendations from CodeGuru. And it takes approximately around, I would say, maybe around 5-10 minutes in this particular case, this particular application that we are running. And if we go out here on CodeGuru side, on the CodeGuru dashboard panel, you can see the number of pull requests has increased from 7 to 8. So it has gotten the pull request notification. And now if you go into code reviews, here you can see that I have one more entry which is showing in the pending state. And this is right now, the churning is happening. The code is scanned, it is being run over the machine learning models, and the recommendations will soon be generated based upon this. So this takes around a few minutes, and it will give me the output for this. Just for the time's sake, what I can do is I can show you one of the pull requests that I've done in the past, just to show you the types of issues that it will catch and it will flag, right? So if you see from here, these are the various different recommendations that you would get. There are approximately around, there are 5 recommendations that were given by Amazon CodeGuru. So think of it as, if I'm a developer, I'm sitting out here, I've submitted a pull request, pretty much on the same page, I'm getting all the recommendations back. And from here, I can see that it has identified this piece of code, and it has identified that I'm using the list objects, right? So list objects is a API which is now deprecated, and it's outdated. It is recommending to use list objects v2. So in fact, it provides you with a link to that API. And here you can see there are all the details about that particular API on how you use it. Here you can see the list objects is a deprecated API, and now it's replaced with v2. So you have all the details that are needed. Apart from that, the second part it found was it is finding certain pieces of code which has the thread concurrency risk. What that means by what it means by that out here is, here we are doing a simple get command for a particular entry, for a particular entry in the hash map, and we are trying to read the value out of it. Based upon that, if we don't get anything, we will create a new value, and we'll try to put in a new object in there. And that new object is being done using the put. Now, what happens is, if you have multiple threads that could be running concurrently, by the time one thread is looking at this, and it moves to the next one, the other thread may have created an object already, and the original thread might be trying to create an object when the object is already there. So it might either overwrite it, or it might go into some kind of an error condition, and that is the risk that it has identified. And so what it does is, it even provides the recommendation that rather than using put, can you use put if absent? So that way, even if the other thread has created it, your code will handle that situation. and you will not face an issue. So the things that I find it very cool out here when I start running into this is there are some good examples that are given with all the recommendations, right? So if you go out here, you will see a particular code, how it is using this put if absent in its existing code. So that's the cool part about it, where it is providing all that information.
Yeah. One thing I was just going to point out, if we go back to the comments that we were just looking at, it's there's a lot of ways when we think about the way of improving static code reviews in some sort of automated fashion. There's a lot of greenfield in how we can do that. And I think the thing that's most exciting here to me is that this identifies the code block. It is going to describe to you what the problem is fundamentally with that code block. It will provide a proposed fix too, because just knowing the problem doesn't mean that you have arrived at a or an optimal type of fix. And then to actually see an example of that in you just linked what looks like the source code to like Hadoop, to give someone sort of the peace of mind of, okay, well, this is actually an example of how this is implemented in the wild. Like, that really just sort of strings together the entirety of what I would want in a code review process here.
Absolutely. And it's very clear, exactly like you mentioned. It describes the problem, it provides you fix, and it provides you with more information, including with an example. And this is what we call it as actionable recommendations, that it does not necessarily just point it out, but it also provides you the fix that can be utilized. So in this particular case, it is as simple as we are instantiating S3 client on pretty much every Lambda invocation, and it would tell you that you might want to use the static initialization or use static variables so that it could be reused. So you could potentially just reuse the existing HTTP connections and not necessarily create it every time. In fact, it gives you a link of what are the best practices for working for AWS Lambda functions. This particular recommendation is more geared towards here. Say, for example, if we are listing objects from an S3, we are collecting out here. It is requesting that you are not doing a pagination check, because the output that you might get is the first page. You might need to loop through the output to just ensure that you've gotten all output and there is no other page left. So in a way, it is good to have this always caught as a practice, and this is the place where these are the places where I really feel that the automated recommendations that comes in for any pieces of line of code, it will flag it and it will let you know that. And lastly, it provides you a recommendation where in this particular case, in this code, you have created a resource, and now you're kind of waiting in a loop. And here there is a while loop, and this is the usual tendency that is taken, that we wait in a while loop until the resource is created, and we keep checking whether the resource is created or not. This may not be the best use of your CPU and memory, and that's the reason why there is this new functionality, new API, which was the waiters feature was introduced, that you could utilize that waiters API, and in fact it gives you a link for that too. So if you go in here and watch this is a full-fledged blog on how to use waiters with examples in the code. That will give you very detailed guidance on how the waiters can be used in your code.
So I'm not personally super familiar with waiters in particular, but essentially and correct me if my misunderstanding or my understanding is wrong here, but CodeGuru Reviewer can even make suggestions where there could be a more optimal asynchronous implementation as opposed to this synchronous implementation here. Is that essentially something that we're seeing?
Pretty much in that line, because waiters, you have async waiters, and you could have different types of waiters which are in polling. So you could utilize and implement it in different ways that you want, and it guides you through that different options, this particular blog. But exactly to your point is, if it sees, and it goes more towards, more from the profiler perspective also, like Daniela was showing you the visualization, and in fact, from your visualization of the code, you could potentially see what are those function blocking calls and what are the calls which are kind of waiting in a timed out mode or waiting. That gives you a kind of an idea that what are these functions which are spending much more time than required. So those performance issues are also something which is very important to be caught by the profiler. And from reviewer perspective, it will identify any optimization that you can do from the code perspective before even building out the code.
Yeah, this sort of starts to come full circle to some of the stuff that Rob was talking about before. When you really think about what your most expensive lines of code can be, well, there's clearly some implementations that can just objectively be suboptimal, which it seems like Reviewer does a really good job of catching here. But then, you're in practice, your most expensive lines of code can be due to something that's not explicitly included in your code, which is traffic patterns and utilization and how your application scales up, essentially. And that's something that, Profiler, which Daniela covered before, would cover. And the idea is that Reviewer should catch some of these issues that could cause problems downstream, but we would rather catch those up here in the code integration process.
Absolutely. And in fact, to the point that Rob covered in a very early part of the phase, where he was talking about how he was doing the string copy operation, the word that you used was very important, Nick, that subjective. And really, CodeGuru really objectively finds out what are the recommendations that you should implement, because there are many other aspects, many other point of views and approaches that can be taken, and it can be pretty much subjective based upon what kind of code you are building out. And CodeGuru Reviewer does a good job in looking at the code. Because what it does is when the code is scanned, right? When the pull request notification is sent, when the code is scanned, the code which is covered within that pull request is the only code which is scanned by the CodeGuru. But in fact, if there are two different files, say for example they are included, those whole files are read in entirety. So it gives itself a proper context of what is the code flow looking like. And based upon that, it creates these objective recommendations and throws it out in the output.
Nikunj, I've got two questions.
Sure.
One is the examples you're showing us here are fairly in depth with respect to how you use the AWS SDK, and that's very interesting. So, kind of connecting this to one of the news items that we covered at the beginning of the segment. If I start writing, let's say, a connection pool manager for RDS, and I just write this as a standalone Java package, does CodeGuru have the ability to detect, hey, it looks like what you're trying to do at a conceptual level is you're writing a connection pool manager. Don't do that. Use RDS proxy instead, right? Can it do things like that? Do you have examples like that are kind of, I'm not quite sure how to describe it exactly, but are more meta, right? It's not like this API call has a v2 is deprecated or has a v2 inline replacement. More like this pattern is not recommended, and I think you're alluding to that, but I didn't see an example here. Is that something you can talk to?
Yeah, and pretty much it goes in the line with, and I'm sharing this particular screen. This screen will actually provide you with much more detailed information exactly to answer your question. What are the different categories of issues that CodeGuru Reviewer can make comments on and can detect? So what this means is there are specific detectors in CodeGuru that are integrated, and these are various different detectors in various different categories which can detect these kind of issues and can make recommendations. For example, the one which you are mentioning about is AWS best practices. It has the knowledge about how the APIs are supposed to be used. And if those APIs are potentially used in a non-optimal way, or if there is a better way of using it, or maybe an incorrect way, it will point out that. So AWS best practices is just one part of it, and the other examples that we went through in the demo was more in terms of concurrency, thread concurrency, and so. But to answer your question, basically that would fall into this category of AWS best practices.
I guess.
Okay, but more oh, sorry. Let me just finish this thought. But specifically, like a human reviewer, looking at that thing, they would say, well, okay, I see that you're creating several different connections to RDS. What are you doing with those connections? And then you look at the structure and you look at how they're being stored. You're like, oh, okay, it looks like you're creating a connection pool, right? Does CodeGuru have the ability to kind of take that macro level approach and realize like what you're doing is creating some sort of pool? Is that what you should be doing with respect to best practices?
So from the point of view of CodeGuru Reviewer, what it does is it would read through the code and hopefully the file that is included in the pull request, right? So say for example, usually when a developer would make a code change, there would be some level of code change that will be included in that pull request. Now, as long as that code change has proper full detailed context of, say for example, number of connections that will be spawned, or the number of connections that will be created, all of those information, as long as it is available for CodeGuru to review it, it will be able to make recommendations on that. So definitely it is as long as it can understand the piece of code and it is aware of a much more optimal pattern with which the code can be improved upon, the recommendation will be generated.
Yeah. To one quick follow-up to that. So let's take another case. I think the RDS example is a bit contrived maybe, but let's say I'm writing my own Redis driver for Java, and I have a GitHub repo where I keep all of this code, and what I'm doing is constantly updating that repo, right? And I'm saying, hey, actually, this put request in this driver is being deprecated. I am deprecating this function. I am the maintainer of that library. I'm deprecating that API call in favor of the put v2. So does CodeGuru have the ability to understand that, and if so, how?
That's a good question. So I think from CodeGuru perspective, what it focuses on is the set of APIs, which are AWS APIs, which are published, and it is aware of and it has knowledge about which ones are the current one, which one are the deprecated one. And from the Java APIs perspective, for example, if there is a specific API which is purely related to Java and nothing to do from the AWS API perspective, that also it would keep track of. However, from the feedback perspective, from a user perspective, if you want to provide a feedback, the feedback that you can provide is more from the perspective of the recommendation that was generated, whether it was useful or not. So, in fact, actually, in those CodeGuru Reviewer comments that showed up in the on the GitHub page, you have a small icon out there. You can select whether plus or minus, depending on whether the recommendation was useful to you. So that is the kind of feedback that CodeGuru accepts from the users, from our customers, and it will provide an input into CodeGuru service that which are the recommendations which are more useful compared to others. So as of today, it is restricted to mainly those kind of feedback that we can provide.
Rob.
Okay, let me try and reframe the question very, very slightly. So what we saw was the S3, an example of an S3 API in the AWS SDK, where it says this has a v2 that you should use instead. We also saw CodeGuru commenting on the use of the concurrent hash map within the Java standard library, right? So it's clearly knows about those two things. What I'm wondering is if I include a third-party library, and that third-party library on its documentation or its GitHub repo says very clearly this particular API call should no longer be used. It should be deprecated in favor of these two API calls. Does CodeGuru have the ability to fold that in for a third-party library?
Right. From the third-party library, I'm as far as I know, it would not be able to. But we can because from the point of view of say for example the libraries that it is aware of, right? Those are more in terms of the ones which are say for example Java based or from the AWS APIs perspective, those are the ones that it needs to focus on, or the detectors are built on that. Say, for example, what you're suggesting is if there is a way that we can provide an input into service, that which libraries are outdated and which ones are not. That is something that that we can consider it as something which we should be looking for if there is a demand for having that kind of a capability.
Yeah, and I guess like circling back to Rob's point before about hey, AWS just launched RDS proxy, right? When can we expect CodeGuru to implement best practices like that? In sort of the wheelhouse of how these sorts of models are trained under the hood. In order to have that as a possibility, would then need to be trained on PRs and repos that incorporate that, and the model would then be able to hopefully figure out that this is a set of behavior that is building your own connection pooling, and an advisable sort of reconciliation for that would be maybe using a managed tool like RDS proxy. But yeah, the advisement on around new tools and like what the time frame looks like for that is an interesting question going forward. Not one that I'd imagine there's some sort of SLA on, but hopefully over time we can expect to see some of those AWS best practices incorporated at sort of the theoretical level there too.
Yeah, and apart from that, I think as I was mentioned, I think from the examples that were covered, mostly this is the one which is also very important, which is the sensitive information leak. This is basically a very important aspect of it, where any kind of an sensitive information, not only from the code perspective, but say, for example, any logs or any exceptions that are thrown out, it wants to ensure that none of the sensitive information is leaked out in there. So there is a good amount of detectors built on that also. But recently also we have introduced the input validation. This is something also very important as a detector, that if you are not doing input validation, you have more risk for the code to really inject either some malicious attack or some kind of an unintentional service component changes or so that could impact your application well-being. So in a way, these are various different types of detectors that are integrated within CodeGuru, and it will provide the actionable recommendations based upon these.
Awesome. Well, we're creeping up on almost 2 hours here on CodeGuru, which is awesome. There's been so much to talk about, and I guess some people joined us later on, but to sort of recap what we've covered again, CodeGuru, sort of this, I guess, in my own words, this like Swiss Army knife to help improve and cut out many of the problems that exist in the software authoring and testing and profiling sort of life cycle. And we saw sort of these two main aspects, sort of the more passive side here with Reviewer that can assess your PRs and your code sort of as is for explicit issues or use of bad practices. And then previously we had Daniela talk to us a little bit about Profiler and show us how you can ascertain more insights into the operational inefficiencies or the finding the most expensive lines of code based on your application running with its expected traffic patterns. So truly a very wide breadth of feature sets and sort of surface area for what CodeGuru can cover here.
Well, and I think more importantly, the framework and the way of operating that is put in place here immediately implies that this is something that's going to continue to improve, right? The fact that you have a model that is driving these things, the fact that you were able to show us a slide that's like, these are the factors that we can make recommendations based on today, that immediately tells me that of course you're going to add more in the future based on customer feedback.
Absolutely. I think as you go further, I think there is a lot of requests to be that we are getting for support for various different languages. So if there are such demands, please provide us more information about it so that we can prioritize the feature support for that.
Awesome. And this is one thing we always like to talk a little bit about, especially now that the service is GA. A lot of customers have been able to get their hands on this in the preview phase of it. And I have a little bit of a list here. We see that for Profiler, customers like Atlassian, Eagle Dream, and YouCanBook.me are using that to better understand and reduce their costs of their applications in production. And then I see here Dev Factory and Renga, active users of the CodeGuru Reviewer. So always excited to have these launch partners that work and get hands-on with the service and get to see that value themselves. So very happy to see that. And the golden question that I think a lot of people have been wondering, in addition, the second most popular question after when is this coming to the language that I like the most, but how can I get started with CodeGuru? I believe that there is a set of demo applications that are out there, and from a cost perspective, I believe CodeGuru is free for up to 90 days to use. Is that true?
That is true.
Awesome.
That is absolutely, yeah.
Great. Well, we have some more info being dropped in the chat there for CodeGuru's product page. We also have a sample repository that actually covers the exact demo that Nikunj showed us today. We'll get that link dropped in chat as well. But without further ado, Nikunj, thank you for joining us again. First time we've had two guests on to cover, one launch, but I think it really warranted it. Reviewer and Profiler, two very different value propositions, but I think they all bubble up to solving problems in software development, and that's something that affects anyone that works in that space. So very excited to have gotten to show this. Nikunj, again, thank you for joining us. We will be right back. We're going to take a very, very quick break, and then we have our final demo of the day, which is going to be AWS App2 Container. So sit tight. We'll be right back.